a werewolf shifter romance audiobook. The wind over Ver never truly sleeps. It howls down from the black glass peaks of the Lycan Range, carrying the scent of pine resin, wet stone, and old blood that never quite washes from the snow. Moonlight here is not soft. It is a blade, silver and merciless, slicing through storm clouds to brand the world beneath it. In the valleys, the werewolf packs cling to their carved manners and ancient hierarchies, whispering prayers to a goddess who has not answered in 1,000 years. Above them all, perched on cliffs that kiss the sky, sits the obsidian citadel, home of the immortal Lycan King, where even the shadows bow. This is a land that remembers every betrayal. Rejection is not just pain, it is law. A broken bond leaves scars that glow faintly under moonlight, marking the rejected as cursed, untouchable. The noble packs twist every sacred law to keep power in their gilded claws. Rogues are hunted. Rejected lunas are shamed into silence. Yet tonight, somewhere between the howling wind and the indifferent stars, one rejected woman is about to discover that some scars are not endings. They are beginnings. Close your eyes. Feel the cold bite your skin. Hear the wolves singing their grief to a moon that finally is listening. And let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Ash Bride and the Silver Blade. The howl that tore through the Emberstone packhouse that night was not grief. It was relief. Elisa stood alone on the frost-rimed balcony of the grand hall, her bare arms prickling against the bite of the wind that swept down from the distant peaks. Inside, through the thick panes of glass etched with ancient pack runes, the bonding feast unfolded in a haze of golden firelight and laughter that rang false to her ears. Tables groaned under platters of roasted venison and honeyed fruits, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and spiced wine. Her alpha husband, Rhys, held court at the head of the room, his broad shoulders draped in the ceremonial furs of their lineage, his smile sharp as a predator's as he raised a goblet in toast. And there, at his side, glowing like the favored child she had always been, stood Gina, her sister, the golden one, with hair like spun sunlight and eyes that sparkled with effortless triumph. The contrast clawed at Elisa's chest, the warmth of the hall, alive with pack members in their finest silks and leathers, pressing close in ritual dances that mimicked the moon's pull on their beasts. And out here, the silver cold that seeped into her bones, the moonlight slicing across the stone like a blade, turning the world to sharp edges and shadows. She pressed her palms against the balustrade, the chill of the marble grounding her, reminding her that she was still here, still breathing, even if no one inside seemed to remember. 3 years. That was how long she had worn the hollow title of Luna, a political tool to seal an alliance, then quietly discarded the moment Gina came of age. She had been 18 when her father pressed her hand into Rhys's, murmuring that duty would be enough. She had believed him. She had believed that if she was quiet enough, strong enough, useful enough, someone might eventually look at her the way they looked at her sister. They never did. Tonight, the feast was the final severing. Rhys had waited until the entire pack was gathered, until the wine had loosened tongues and the fires burned high, to pull Gina forward and name her the true heart of Emberstone. The howls that rose were joyous, hungry, relieved. A clean break. A prettier, sweeter Luna. And Elisa, the discarded one, was left outside to watch it all through glass that might as well have been a wall of ice. She did not cry. Tears were for girls who still had hope, and hers had frozen solid long ago. A soft footfall behind her shattered the silence. Mira, the only servant who still dared speak her name without flinching, approached with hurried steps, clutching her shawl against the wind. "Luna! Elisa!" she whispered, correcting herself, eyes wide with urgency. "The Lycan King's delegation has been sighted on the ridge. They'll reach the gates within the hour, for the royal inspection." Elisa's breath clouded in the air. Ferris, the immortal king whose name alone made alphas pale. A man, no, a force, who answered to no one but the moon herself. Why tonight, of all nights? She turned back to the glass, catching her reflection. Sharp cheekbones, storm-dark eyes, mouth set in a line that had forgotten how to soften. Not broken, never broken, just tired of pretending. "Prepare the antechamber," she said, voice low and steady. "I'll serve them myself." Mira hesitated, then nodded and vanished. Inside, the feast continued, oblivious. Elisa slipped through the side corridors like a shadow, directing servants with quiet, clipped commands. Finest crystal, rarest mead, silver platters polished until they reflected the torchlight like moons. Let Rhys choke on his triumph when the king walked in and found the rejected wife playing hostess. The great doors groaned open an hour later, and the temperature in the hall plummeted. The smell struck her first, sharp iron, high-altitude ice, and something darker, older, like storms trapped inside a man's skin. It poured into the room ahead of its owner, drowning pine smoke and wine until every wolf felt their beast sit up and take notice. Conversation died mid-sentence. Dancers froze. Even the fires guttered, as though the very flames bowed. Elisa stepped forward with the heavy silver tray balanced on steady hands, chin high, moving through the parted crowd toward the newcomers. Black cloaks, silver runes, warriors who moved like weapons given flesh, and at their center, him. Ferris, the Lycan King, filled the doorway the way night fills a horizon. Taller than any wolf had a right to be, forged from midnight and mountain granite. His armor was matte black leather, etched with faint silver that caught the firelight and threw it back colder. Hair the color of a raven's wing fell in loose waves to his shoulders, and his eyes, slate gray, ringed with molten silver, ancient and unreadable, pinning the room in place with lazy, absolute power. Beneath the open throat of his cloak, the moon's mark glowed, a living brand of liquid silver across his collarbone, pulsing like a second heartbeat. His gaze swept the hall once, dismissive. Then it found her. The tray suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Something flared across his face, raw, animal, unmistakable. A low growl rumbled from his chest, too low for human ears, but it vibrated straight through her bones and woke her wolf with a violence that stole her breath. Her pulse thundered in her ears, heat and ice colliding beneath her skin. Rhys recovered first, stepping forward with Gina tucked close to his side, voice booming with false warmth. "Your Majesty, Emberstone welcomes you. The bonding feast is honored." Ferris cut him off without looking away from Elisa. His voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder wrapped in velvet. "Alpha Rhys," he said, every syllable deliberate. "Your pack is orderly." A pause. Heavy. Icy. "Your Luna, however, appears to be an oversight." A collective inhale. Goblets trembled in nervous hands. Rhys's face drained of color, his fingers digging into Gina's arm hard enough to bruise. Gina's perfect lips parted in shock. Ferris finally shifted his gaze to Rhys, and the alpha shrank half a step, instinct recognizing a predator far higher on the chain. "I will speak with the Luna, alone." It was not a request. Rhys opened his mouth, closed it, found no words. The king's guard moved like liquid shadow, clearing a path. Elisa set the tray down on the nearest table with deliberate care, the crystal chiming softly, the only sound in the frozen hall. She felt every stare like needles, but she did not lower her eyes. Ferris waited. She walked past Rhys without sparing him a glance and followed the king into the torchlit corridor beyond the feast. The heavy doors thudded shut behind them, muffling the chaos. Silence fell, thick enough to taste. He circled her slowly, boots soundless on the stone, the air growing colder with every step until her breath clouded between them. Up close, he was even larger, the heat of his body at war with the ice in his scent. She refused to step back, refused to drop her gaze. "Your scent is a challenge to my senses, little wolf," he murmured, voice dropping to midnight and smoke. Your husband is a fool." His fingers brushed the faint scar on her inner wrist, an old mark from childhood, ignored while Gina's every hurt was kissed better. The skin flared silver beneath his touch, a pulse of light that made her gasp. His eyes darkened, pupils blowing wide. He pressed something cold and heavy into her palm and closed her fingers over it. A single black iron coin, stamped with the Obsidian Citadel's wolf and moon sigil. "Keep this safe, Ash Bride," he said, the words curling around her like smoke and possession. "I will be back for what is mine." Chapter 2. The Weight of an Unseen Claim. Elisa woke with the taste of iron and mountain frost still clinging to the back of her tongue. She lay perfectly still in the narrow bed of her sparse chambers, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling where moonlight bled through the shutters in thin silver bars. The black iron coin rested on her sternum, exactly where she had placed it before sleep finally dragged her under. It was warm now, warm from her skin, warm from the pulse that had not slowed since the king's fingers had closed hers around it. She could still feel the ghost of his touch on her wrist, the way the old scar had flared silver under his thumb, like it recognized him, like it had been waiting. The coin weighed more than metal should. It pressed against her heart with the steady insistence of a second heartbeat. Outside her door, the pack house was quiet. Too quiet. The bonding feast had ended hours ago, the guests gone, the fires banked to embers. Somewhere down the corridor, Rhys and Gina would be tangled together in the Alpha's grand suite, celebrating their new bond while the servants scrubbed honey wine from the floors and pretended they had not witnessed the King of Lycans name the discarded wife something dangerously close to treasure. Elisa closed her fist around the coin and sat up. The room was cold enough that her breath clouded, but the chill felt different now. Less like punishment, more like anticipation. She had barely pulled a wool robe over her nightgown when the door slammed open without a knock. Rhys filled the frame, shirt half-buttoned, hair disheveled, the scent of sex and mead rolling off him in waves. His eyes were wild, pupils blown wide with something between rage and fear. Behind him, the corridor torches guttered as though the air itself flinched. "What did he say to you?" His voice cracked like a whip. Elisa rose slowly, deliberately, letting the robe fall open just enough to reveal the faint silver glow of the old scar on her wrist. Still there, still luminous. Rhys's gaze snapped to it, and his jaw clenched so hard she heard the grind of teeth. "Answer me, Elisa." She tilted her head, tasting the power shift on her tongue like blood. "He said you were a fool, husband. I believe those were his exact words." Rhys crossed the room in 2 strides and seized her upper arms, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Do not play games with me. The Lycan King does not walk into a bonding feast and single out a rejected female for conversation. What did you do?" The old Elisa would have lowered her eyes. The old Elisa would have soothed, apologized, shrunk. This Elisa met his stare and let her wolf rise just enough that her own eyes flashed silver in the dark. "I stood there," she said, voice low and steady, "and he looked at me. That is all." Rhys's grip tightened. "He touched you." "Yes." She smiled, small and sharp. "He did." The growl that tore from Rhys's throat was pure animal. His claws pricked her skin, instinctive, possessive. The same claws that had never once marked her in 3 years of marriage. Now they trembled with the need to reclaim what he had thrown away. "You will tell me everything," he snarled, shaking her once. "Every word, every look." Elisa leaned in until her lips almost brushed his. "No," she whispered. "I don't think I will." For a heartbeat he looked stunned, as though the word had struck him harder than any blow. Then fury flooded back in, hotter than before. "You forget your place." "My place?" She laughed, soft and bitter. "You made my place very clear tonight, Alpha, out on the balcony, in the cold, watching my sister take what was never yours to give away twice." Rhys's face twisted. Something raw flickered beneath the rage, regret, maybe, or the first sour taste of consequences. His mouth opened, closed. For the first time in years, he had no pretty lie ready. Elisa stepped back, out of his grip, and the absence of his hands felt like freedom. "Go back to Gina," she said. "She's waiting to be warmed." She turned her back on him, actually turned her back, and walked to the window. Behind her, she heard his ragged breathing, the creak of boots as he fought the urge to drag her bodily into submission. In the end, he only slammed the door so hard the hinges screamed. Silence rushed back in, thick and electric. Elisa pressed her palm to the frost-laced glass and stared out at the forest beyond the pack walls. Somewhere out there, past the patrols and the scented borders, the mountains rose black and merciless, and at their heart, the obsidian citadel waited. She slipped on soft leather boots, threw a dark cloak over her nightgown, and left the pack house through the servants' gate. The night guards were drunk on feast wine and easy to avoid. The forest welcomed her like it always had. Pine needles muffling her steps, moonlight dappling the path in silver and shadow. She walked until the pack scent thinned and the air tasted clean again, until she reached the ancient circle of standing stones that marked the true border. No wolf came here anymore, too close to rogue territory, too wild. Elisa stepped into the circle and let the cloak fall from her shoulders. The cold kissed her skin, raising goose flesh along her arms, her throat, the curve of her collarbones. She lifted the coin to the moonlight. It caught the silver glow and threw it back hotter, brighter, until it looked like a star trapped in iron. She had questions, 1,000 of them. Why her? Why now? What game was the Lycan King playing, and what would it cost to sit at his table? The coin burned against her palm. A twig snapped behind her. She did not flinch, did not turn. She felt him before she saw him, the sudden drop in temperature, the way the forest itself seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Ferris stepped out of the tree line like he had been woven from the shadows themselves. No cloak tonight, just black leather and steel, the moon's mark blazing at his throat like a living brand. His eyes were fully silver now, glowing with predator focus, and the air around him shimmered with restrained power. He stopped just outside the stone circle, close enough that she could see the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, close enough that his scent flooded her lungs again. Iron, ice, and something darker that made her wolf stretch and ache. "You came," he said, voice a low rumble that vibrated straight through her sternum. "I needed air that didn't stink of lies," she answered. A faint tilt of his lips, not quite a smile, but something dangerous and approving. "And did you find it?" "Not yet." He stepped into the circle. The standing stones seemed to lean inward, acknowledging their king. The moonlight brightened, as though the goddess herself turned her face to watch. Ferris circled her slowly, deliberately, the way a wolf circles a flame. It is deciding whether to fear or consume. Elisa held still, chin high, letting him look, letting him see the steel beneath the ash. "You run, little wolf," he murmured, stopping behind her. His breath stirred the fine hairs at her nape. "But your fear tastes different than you think." He inhaled, slow and deliberate, as though drawing her essence into his lungs. "It tastes of fire, not ice." Her pulse thundered so loudly she was certain he heard it. She turned to face him. Up close, he stole the air from the world. The heat radiating from his body warred with the mountain chill rolling off his skin. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, returned to her eyes. "I am not yours to hunt," she said, proud that her voice did not shake. "No," he agreed, the word velvet and gravel. "You are mine to claim. There is a difference." He lifted one hand, slow enough that she could have stepped away, and brushed the pad of his thumb across her lower lip. The touch was feather-light and devastating. Heat exploded low in her belly, shocking, unwelcome, undeniable. Elisa's breath caught. Her wolf whined, pressing against the inside of her skin, begging for more. Ferris's eyes darkened to molten silver. He leaned in until his lips hovered a breath from hers, until she could taste the frost on his exhale. "I could mark you right here," he whispered against her mouth. "One bite, one drop of royal blood in your veins, and no wolf in Ver would ever dare look through you again." His scent flooded her, wrapped around her, sank into her pores until the forest spun, until the only solid thing left was the heat of his body and the iron weight of the coin clenched in her fist. "But I won't," he continued, voice dropping to something raw. "Not until you stand in my hall wearing my colors and tell me yes with that sharp tongue and those storm eyes. I don't want your surrender, Elisa. I want your fire, willing, burning, mine." He stepped back. Just one step, but the absence of his heat left her swaying. "Go back to your cage, Ash Bride," he said softly. "Let's see how long the lock holds." Then he melted into the shadows, the way only a Lycan King could, until only the echo of his scent and the lingering burn on her lip remained. Elisa stood in the stone circle long after he was gone, moonlight washing over her skin, the coin searing her palm like a brand. For the first time in 3 years, the night did not feel cold. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks, electric, inevitable, and utterly alive. Chapter 3. The King's Decree and the Shattered Bond. She woke tasting him, iron and storm, and the ghost of a promise pressed to her lower lip. Elisa's eyes snapped open to the pale gray of pre-dawn. The coin lay on the pillow beside her cheek, warm from her skin, the wolf and moon sigil catching the first thread of light like a secret smile. Her pulse still thundered from the dream, silver eyes, a voice like midnight, the almost kiss that had left her aching and furious and alive. She sat up slowly, every inch of her body aware of itself in a way it had never been under Rhys's indifferent hands. The faint scar on her wrist glowed softly, as though Ferris's thumb had branded her from miles away. Outside her window, the pack house was already stirring. Servants' footsteps, the clang of cookpots, the low murmur of wolves preparing for morning patrol. And beneath it all, something else, a restless electricity in the air, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. She dressed with deliberate care. A high-necked gown the color of storm clouds, hair braided tight, the black iron coin slipped into a hidden pocket over her heart. When she stepped into the corridor, every wolf she passed dropped their gaze, but not before she saw the flicker of unease. They had scented him on her skin last night. They knew. Rhys was waiting in the great hall. He stood by the cold hearth, shoulders rigid, golden hair tousled as though he had not slept. When he turned, his eyes went straight to her throat, searching for a mark that wasn't there, yet, and something dark and desperate flashed across his face. "You reek of him!" he snarled, voice raw. Elisa did not slow her stride. "Good morning to you too, Alpha." He moved faster than she expected, blocking her path, hand shooting out to circle her upper arm. His claws pricked through the fabric. "I smelled him on the wind last night, in our territory, near you." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up into his eyes, and let her own wolf rise just enough that silver bled into her irises. "Remove your hand, Rhys." For a heartbeat he didn't. Then his fingers loosened, almost against his will, and he stepped back as though burned. "I rejected you out of duty," he said, the words tumbling too fast, too ragged. "The elders, they feared your bloodline, the old stories about uncontrollable females, the risk to the alliance." "Stop." Her voice cut clean through his excuses. "You rejected me because it was easier to keep Gina happy than to look at me and see the mistake you made." His jaw worked. "I never wanted—" "You never wanted me," she finished softly, "until someone else did." The truth hung between them like a blade. Before he could answer, the great doors at the far end of the hall burst open. A cold wind swept in, carrying the scent of snow and iron. An iron wolf herald strode through, black cloak snapping, silver runes blazing on his breastplate. Behind him marched 6 royal guards, silent and lethal. The hall fell silent. Every wolf dropped to one knee. The herald unrolled a parchment sealed with black wax, and the obsidian citadel's sigil. His voice rang off the rafters like a war horn. By decree of Ferris, Lycan King of the Iron Wolf Crown, bearer of the moon's mark, sovereign of Ver. Let it be known that Alpha Rhys of Emberstone has failed to honor the sacred mate bond granted by the goddess. Let it be known that the Luna Elisa has been cast aside, her worth denied, her fire smothered beneath duty and cowardice. Under the ancient law of salvage, first written in the blood of the moon herself, the king claims the right to raise what was wrongly discarded. Elisa of Emberstone is hereby summoned to the Obsidian Citadel. She will stand before the throne as candidate for Luna of the Iron Wolf Crown. Any wolf who attempts to hinder her passage will answer to royal steel. The parchment snapped shut. The silence that followed was absolute. Elisa felt the weight of every stare. Shock, envy, fear, hunger. Gina stood near the staircase, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with something that might have been terror or triumph. Rhys looked as though the floor had dropped out from beneath him. The herald's gaze found Elisa across the hall. "Luna," he said, bowing low. "Your escort awaits." Rhys found his voice at last. "This is madness. She is Emberstone, my wife." "Former wife," Elisa corrected, calm and clear. "You severed the bond in front of the entire pack, Rhys. You cannot unsay those words because a bigger wolf looked twice." She stepped past him, chin high, the coin burning against her heart like a second pulse. Rhys lunged, catching her wrist hard enough to bruise. "You are mine," he hissed, low and desperate, dragging her close. "I rejected you out of duty, not desire. You will always be mine." His scent flooded her, pine and smoke, and the faint trace of Gina's perfume. Once it had been home. Now it made her stomach turn. She leaned in until her lips brushed the shell of his ear. "You forfeited your right to me," she whispered, "the day you made my shame your power, Rhys." Then she twisted her wrist free with a move she had never dared use before, and the crack of bone on bone echoed through the hall as her palm met his cheek. Rhys staggered, eyes wide with shock. Elisa did not look back. She walked the length of the great hall alone, every step ringing against the stone, the parted wolves kneeling deeper as she passed. The herald fell in beside her. The guards formed a silent honor guard. At the threshold she paused, just long enough to feel the cold mountain wind kiss her face, and then she stepped into the dawn. Ferris was waiting. He stood at the head of a column of black war horses, cloak snapping in the wind, the moon's mark blazing like a star at his throat. His gaze locked on her the instant she appeared, silver eyes flaring with something fierce and possessive and proud. He did not dismount. He simply extended one gloved hand. The choice was hers. It always had been. Behind her, Rhys' broken voice cracked across the courtyard. "Elisa!" She did not turn. She placed her hand in Ferris's. His fingers closed around hers like iron and velvet. In one smooth motion, he pulled her up onto the saddle in front of him, her back to his chest, his arm banding around her waist with unapologetic ownership. The heat of him burned through her cloak, through her skin, straight into the hollow place Rhys had left empty for 3 years. Ferris leaned down until his lips brushed the shell of her ear, his voice a dark promise meant for her alone. "She is no longer yours to reject," he said, loud enough for every wolf in the courtyard to hear. "She is now mine to claim." Then he wheeled the massive stallion, cloak flaring like raven wings, and the royal column thundered out of Emberstone lands. Elisa did not look back once. The wind roared past them, carrying away the scent of pine and smoke and every chain she had ever worn. Ahead, the black glass peaks rose like teeth against the sky, and at their heart waited a citadel of obsidian and storm. She pressed her palm to the coin beneath her cloak and felt it pulse in perfect rhythm with the heart beating against her spine. For the first time in her life, Elisa rode toward something instead of away. And the moon, high and cold and ancient, watched her go with silver approval. Chapter 4. The Citadel of Iron and Ice. The journey took 3 days and 3 nights, and every mile carved something new into her bones. They rode through passes where the wind screamed like a living thing, where snow fell upward in spirals, and the horse's breath froze in silver clouds. The guards never spoke unless spoken to. Their silence was reverence, not coldness. Ferris kept her before him the entire time, one iron arm locked around her waist, the steady drum of his heart against her spine, the only constant in a world that grew harsher and more beautiful with every league. At night, they made camp beneath skies so clear the stars looked close enough to cut. The guards circled the fire at a distance, giving the king and his claimed Luna the illusion of privacy. He never touched her beyond what was necessary for warmth, yet every brush of his gauntlet against her hip, every low command murmured against her hair, left her skin humming like a drawn bowstring. On the third dawn, the obsidian citadel rose out of the storm like a blade thrust up from the heart of the mountain. Black glass walls, veined with silver, climbing so high they scraped the clouds. Banners of midnight silk snapped in the gale, each one bearing the same wolf and moon sigil stamped on the coin, now fused to her palm by sweat and sleepless want. The gates opened without sound, and the column rode through into a courtyard vast enough to swallow the entire Emberstone packhouse twice over. Elisa's breath caught. Everything was sharp edges and impossible scale. Arches carved from single slabs of obsidian, torches burning with cold blue fire, staircases that spiraled up into darkness. The air tasted of metal and ice and power so old it had weight. Wolves in black and silver livery knelt as they passed, but their eyes followed her. Curious, wary, hungry. Ferris dismounted first, then reached up and lifted her down as though she weighed nothing. His hands lingered at her waist a breath longer than courtesy allowed, thumbs pressing just above her hip bones, branding her through layers of wool and leather. "Welcome home, little wolf," he said, voice low enough that only she heard the possessive curl beneath the words. He did not release her hand as he led her through corridors lit by veins of liquid silver running through the walls themselves. Wolves bowed. Some stared openly. Whispers trailed behind them like smoke. They stopped at a pair of doors carved with scenes of the moon goddess birthing the first Lycans from starlight and storm. Ferris pushed them open and stepped aside so she could enter first. The chambers stole what little breath the altitude had left her. A vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Windows that stretched from floor to heaven. Framing a view of the entire dominion of Vare spread beneath them like a map made of snow and shadow. A hearth big enough to roast an elk, already blazing. Furs the color of midnight and winter wheat heaped on an enormous bed, raised on a dais of black stone. And everywhere, her new colors, storm gray and silver, waiting to be worn. Ferris watched her take it in, arms folded, expression unreadable. "You will have everything you require," he said. "Clothing, books, weapons if you wish them. This tower is yours. No one enters without your leave, not even me." The last words hung between them, deliberate and weighted. Elisa turned to him slowly. "And if I decide I want to leave?" His eyes flared molten silver. "Then you walk out the front gate, and no hand will stop you. But know this, Elisa. Once you step beyond my walls, every pack in Vare will scent weakness. They will come for you, not because they want you, but because they cannot bear to see something I touched walking free." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to that midnight register that made her knees weak. "I claimed you to save you from a slow death by shame. What you do with that salvation is your choice. Always." Then he was gone, the doors closing with a whisper of finality. She stood alone in the vast silence, the fire crackling, the wind howling against the glass, and felt the first true breath she had taken in years fill her lungs like oxygen after drowning. Hours later, After she had bathed in scalding water, scented with juniper, and dressed in a gown of charcoal silk that clung like smoke, a knock sounded. Soft, respectful. She opened the door to a scarred warrior with one eye the color of winter sky and the other covered by a black patch. He bowed low. "Kyle," he introduced himself. "Captain of the King's Guard. His Majesty thought you might have questions." He stepped inside only far enough to lean against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying her with the blunt honesty of a soldier. "The king is not a good man, Luna," he said without preamble. "But he is a just king. Know the difference. He has waited centuries for a female who could stand at his side without flinching. Most break, some run. A few try to kill him in his sleep." A faint smirk. "He still has the scar from the last one." Elisa lifted her chin. "And what happens if I decide I don't want to be his Luna after all?" Kale's smirk softened into something almost gentle. "Then he will let you go, and he will raise half the continent, making sure no one ever touches you again. That is also who he is." He pushed off the doorframe. "Dinner is in 1 hour. The king requests the honor of your company. Not as a prisoner, as a guest." He left her staring at the closed door, heart hammering against the coin still hidden beneath her gown. When she descended the winding stair to the private dining hall, every eye in the fortress seemed to follow. The hall was smaller than the great throne room, but no less imposing. Long table of black glass, chairs carved from dragon bone, or something that had once roared. Chandeliers of frozen starlight floating above. Ferris stood at the head, clad in a simple tunic of midnight wool that did nothing to hide the power beneath. The moon's mark glowed softly at his throat, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. He did not rise when she entered. Kings did not rise, but his eyes tracked her every step, silver flaring as the gown moved over her skin like liquid shadow. He pulled out the chair to his right himself. She sat. Servants brought food, venison in blackberry reduction, winter roots glazed with honey and frost pepper, wine the color of fresh blood. Conversation was sparse at first, courtly, careful. Then Ferris leaned back, swirling his goblet, and fixed her with that piercing stare. "Tell me what you want, Elisa." The question hung in the air like a blade. She set her fork down. "I want to stop being the girl they locked in the attic, because her fire made them nervous." A faint tilt of his lips. "And after that?" "I want to learn how to burn without asking permission." Something dark and hungry flashed across his face. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping to intimacy. "I claimed you because you burn bright under the ash, Luna. I don't collect broken things. I collect power." His gaze dragged over her like a touch. "And you, little wolf, are a wildfire wearing human skin." The words sank into her blood like heated wine. He pushed back his chair and stood, offering his hand. "Come, there is something you need to see." She took it. He led her through torch-lit corridors to a balcony that jutted out over the abyss. Far below, the dominion of Vere spread in moonlight and shadow. Every pack light a tiny, flickering candle beneath the vast indifference of the mountains. Ferris stepped behind her, close enough that his chest brushed her back, close enough that his scent flooded her lungs again. "This is what waits," he said against her ear. "A kingdom that eats the weak, a throne that has been cold for 1,000 years, and a king who is tired of ruling alone." His hands settled on the balustrade on either side of her, caging her without touching, heat and restraint and raw, barely leashed want. "I am not asking for a wife, Elisa," he said, voice rough with truth. "I am asking for a partner, and I will burn down your old world if it helps you find your strength." The wind howled around them, whipping her hair across his chest. She felt the tremor in his arms, the only sign that this cost him something too. Elisa closed her eyes, let the cold bite her face, let his heat brand her spine. When she turned in the circle of his arms, the look on his face stole her breath, fierce, reverent, starving. She rose on her toes until her lips almost brushed his. "Then start the fire, Your Majesty," she whispered, "and teach me how to make it obey." The moon's mark at his throat flared white-hot, and somewhere far below, the wolves of the Iron Wolf Crown lifted their heads and began to howl. Chapter 5. Lessons in Power and Proximity. The great hall of the Obsidian Citadel had never been so quiet. Every bench was filled. Every torch burned cold blue. Every wolf in the Iron Wolf Court stood witness, while an elder named Lord Varik, tall, silver-haired, mouth permanently curled in disdain, looked down his aristocratic nose at the female standing alone in the center of the black glass floor. "She is low blood," Varik declared, voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling like a judge's gavel. "Emberstone stock, barely above rogue. You would set this ash bride beside the moon's mark?" Elisa felt the words strike her skin like thrown stones. She felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down, trying to fold her in half. She did not fold. Ferris sat on the obsidian throne, one booted foot resting on his knee, fingers drumming once, slow, deliberate, against the carved armrest. He had not spoken since the session began. He did not need to. The storm in his eyes did it for him. Varik turned to her fully, sneer sharpening. "Speak, girl. Convince us you are more than a passing fancy for a king who has outlived every female who ever tried to warm his bed." A ripple of cruel amusement swept the hall. Elisa lifted her chin. The gown she wore today was silver threaded with midnight. Ferris's colors, but cut to her own severe taste. The black iron coin rested openly now, on a thin chain between her collarbones, catching torchlight like a warning. "I was not asked here to convince you," she said, voice clear, edged, carrying to the highest rafters. "I was claimed under the law of salvage. The moon's mark chose. Your opinion is irrelevant." Gasps, a few snarls. Varik's face purpled. Ferris's drumming fingers stilled. The corner of his mouth lifted, barely, but the pride in his eyes blazed hot enough to burn. Varik took a step forward. "Insolent!" Ferris rose. One moment he was seated, the next he was simply there, between Varik and Elisa, a wall of midnight muscle and lethal calm. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. "Careful, old wolf," Ferris said, voice soft as falling snow and twice as deadly. "You speak to my chosen Luna. Another word out of that mouth, and I will have your tongue mounted beside the rogue banners in the armory." Varik dropped to one knee so fast his bones cracked. Ferris did not look away from him until the elder's forehead touched the floor. Then, slowly, he turned to Elisa. "Lesson 1, he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Power is not given, it is taken, and you just took it." He offered his hand. She placed hers in it without hesitation. The court watched in stunned silence as the Lycan King led the low-blood female out of the hall, past kneeling lords and ladies who suddenly could not meet her eyes. He did not take her back to her tower. Instead, he led her down spiraling stairs cut into the heart of the mountain, past training yards where warriors paused mid-spar to bow, until they reached an armory lit by floating witchlight and smelling of oil, steel, and old blood. Ferris released her hand only long enough to strip off his formal tunic. Beneath it, he wore a simple black sleeveless shirt that clung to every line of muscle and scar. The moon's mark glowed like molten silver against his skin. He tossed her a practice blade, light, perfectly balanced. "Lesson 2, he said, rolling his shoulders. "Never let them see you flinch." They fought. Not gently. He moved like living shadow, strikes precise and merciless, forcing her to remember every dirty trick she had learned surviving Emberstone patrols. She was smaller, faster, meaner when cornered. She used elbows, knees, the hilt of her blade, anything to stay inside his reach where his longer arms lost advantage. The clang of steel echoed off stone. Sweat beaded on her skin, slid down her spine. Every time their bodies collided, heat exploded through her, sharp, dizzying, forbidden. He disarmed her once, twice, 3 times, each time catching her wrist before the blade hit the ground, pulling her flush against him so she felt the thunder of his heart and the rigid proof that this was affecting him as violently as it affected her. On the 4th round, she feinted left, ducked under his strike, and drove her shoulder into his midsection hard enough to lift him off his feet. They crashed to the mats together, her on top, practice blade pressed to the hollow of his throat. For a moment, the world narrowed to ragged breathing and the slick slide of sweat-slick skin. His eyes were pure molten silver. "You flinch away from your own fire, Luna," he rasped, voice gravel and hunger. "Let me teach you to control the burn." She felt him hard beneath her, felt the tremor in the arms that could have thrown her off, but instead caged her gently, reverently. The blade trembled in her grip. Ferris lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, and closed it over hers on the hilt, guiding the weapon away from his throat and tossing it aside. Then his palm slid to the nape of her neck, thumb stroking the frantic pulse beneath her ear. "Tell me to stop," he said against her mouth, giving her the choice, giving her the power. Elisa's answer was to close the last inch and kiss him like she was claiming territory. The growl that tore from his chest was feral. He surged up, rolling them so she was beneath him, one hand cradling her skull so it never touched the mat, the other gripping her hip hard enough to leave bruises she would wear like medals. The kiss was not gentle. It was 3 years of neglect and 1 week of unbearable tension detonating between them. Teeth, tongue, breath shared, until there was no space left for lies or shame or old bonds. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, both shaking, he spoke against her lips. "I was 16 when the mark burned itself into my skin," he said, voice raw. "It took everything, family, choice, mortality. I have worn solitude like armor for 1,000 years, because no one was strong enough to stand inside it with me." His thumb traced her cheekbone with something close to wonder. "You walked into my hall covered in ash and dared them to look away. You are the first creature in centuries who makes me feel mortal, and I would burn the world to keep you." Elisa's heart cracked open and let him in. She reached up, fingers threading through his hair, pulling him down until their mouths were a whisper apart again. "Then stop trying to be my savior," she breathed. "Start being my equal." His answer was a low, reverent curse and another kiss. Slower this time, deeper, a vow sealed in heat and salt and the promise of everything still to come. Much later, when they finally left the armory, her lips were swollen, her gown askew, his shirt torn at the shoulder, where her claws had come out without permission. They walked the corridors side by side, not touching, but the air between them crackled like a storm about to break. At the door to her tower, he stopped, cupped her face with both hands, rested his forehead against hers. "I will wait," he said, voice rough with restraint, "until you come to me wearing my colors because you choose it, not because I commanded it." Then he brushed his thumb across her lower lip, once, gentle, devastating, and walked away. Elisa watched him go, chest heaving, every nerve singing. She shut the door, leaned back against it, and smiled. Slow, sharp, and utterly unafraid. The ash bride was dead. Something fiercer was rising from the flames, and for the first time in her life, Elisa could not wait to see what she would burn next. Chapter 6. The Whisper of the Rogue. The state dinner was a blade wrapped in silk. Long tables of black glass reflected the floating witchlights like fallen stars. Every seat held a lord or lady whose bloodline stretched back to the first moon, their gowns and tunics heavy with silver thread and old power. The air was thick with perfume, roasted meat, and the low, constant hum of wolves measuring one another for weakness. Elisa sat at Ferris's right hand in a gown of liquid silver that moved like moonlight on water. The fabric clung to every line she had earned in the armory, collarbone sharp enough to cut, waist narrow from nights she had forgotten to eat, hips flared from years of running patrol when no one else would. The black iron coin rested openly in the hollow of her throat, catching firelight every time she breathed. She felt the weight of every stare, and she let them look. Ferris lounged at the head of the table, one arm draped over the back of his chair, the other idly tracing the rim of his goblet. He wore black tonight, no silver, no crown. Only the moon's mark blazing at his throat like a declaration. He had not touched her since the armory, not once, but the space between them crackled so violently she was amazed the wine did not boil. Conversation flowed in careful circles, border tensions, harvest yields, the usual dance of power. Then a whisper drifted down the table, low and venomous. Rogues massing in the ashen hollow. They say a new leader has risen. Someone who promises a crown to any wolf strong enough to take it. Ferris's fingers stilled on the goblet. Elisa felt the shift in him, the way a storm front rolls in without sound. She turned her head just enough to catch the speaker, a minor lord with hungry eyes and a mouth too loose for his own good. Ferris set the goblet down with deliberate care. "And what do these rogues offer that my kingdom lacks?" The lord paled, but could not back down in front of the entire court. They say the moon's mark chose wrong. That strength should rule, not blood." A collective inhale. Knives paused halfway to mouths. Ferris smiled, slow, lethal. "Then let them come. I have always enjoyed teaching lessons in person." The hall laughed, nervous and obedient, but the tension did not break. It coiled tighter. Later, when the plates were cleared and the musicians began a low, haunting melody, a servant slipped Elisa a folded square of parchment sealed with plain wax. She recognized the handwriting before she broke the seal. "Rhys, you are not his prisoner. Come home." "I was wrong. I see you now. Let me save you from what he will make you become." The words clawed at old wounds. Save her, as though she were a thing to be rescued instead of a woman choosing her own cage. She crushed the note in her fist. Ferris watched from across the hall, speaking to Kale, but his eyes tracked her every breath. She met his gaze and let him see the storm in her own, the one that had learned to burn. That night the alarms came, a low, bone-deep horn that rolled through the citadel like thunder trapped inside stone. The witch lights flared red. Wolves poured from their quarters already half-shifted, claws out, eyes glowing. Elisa was on the wall before Ferris could send for her. The cold bit deep, wind screaming off the peaks, snow stinging her cheeks. Below, in the valley, torches moved, dozens, hundreds, like a river of fire crawling toward the citadel. Rogues, more than anyone had whispered, and at their head, a banner she had never seen, a crimson wolf devouring a silver moon. Ferris appeared beside her, cloak snapping, the moon's mark blazing so bright it lit the snow around them. "They want a war," he said, voice calm as death. "They will get one." He started to order her below, old instinct, King protecting what was his, but she was already moving, climbing the stairs to the highest battlement where the archers waited. "I know those passes," she said, shouting over the wind. "Old Emberstone patrol routes. There's a ravine half a league east, narrow, hidden. If you send riders through the Icefang tunnel, you can flank them before they reach the gates." Ferris stared at her for one heartbeat. Surprise, calculation, pride. Then he barked orders that sent 24 riders thundering into the dark. The battle was brutal and beautiful. Ferris fought at the front like a god of wrath, blades singing, shadows curling around him like living armor. Elisa stayed on the wall, directing archers with the precision of someone who had once been invisible enough to memorize every weakness in her own pack's defenses. She saw the exact moment the riders hit the rogue flank. Chaos, screams, the crimson banner falling. When the last rogue turned tail and ran, the snow was red for a mile. Ferris returned at dawn, armor splashed with blood that was not his, hair wild, eyes still glowing with battle lust. The gates opened and the warriors poured through. Howling victory! He found her on the inner battlements, cloak whipping around her legs, cheeks stung red by wind and adrenaline. The courtyard fell silent as he climbed the stairs 2 at a time. He did not slow. He reached her, cupped her face with both blood-streaked hands, and kissed her in front of every wolf who had ever doubted her. It was not gentle. It was not polite. It was teeth and tongue, and 3 days of restraint shattering between them. It was his growl vibrating through her ribs, her claws digging into his shoulders, the taste of rogue blood and victory and home. When they broke apart, both shaking, he rested his forehead against hers. "You belong in the heart of the fire, Elisa," he rasped, voice raw, not watching from the window. "Tell me you want this." She answered by sinking her teeth into the tendon of his neck, not deep enough to mark, just enough to claim. Then she pulled back, met his blazing eyes, and kissed the blood from his jaw. The warriors below erupted into howls that shook the citadel to its foundations. Later, when the dead were counted and the wounded tended, Ferris found her in the moonlit corridor outside the infirmary. He backed her against the wall, hands braced on either side of her head, breathing like he had run 1,000 miles. "I will give you the world on fire," he said against her mouth. "Just say yes." Elisa threaded her fingers through his hair and pulled him down until their lips barely touched. "I already did," she whispered. Then she kissed him again. Slow, deliberate, a promise and a warning. The rogue threat was only beginning, but for the first time in her life, Elisa was exactly where she belonged, in the heart of the storm, with a king who would burn kingdoms to keep her there, and a fire inside her chest, finally allowed to roar. Chapter 7. Intimacy and the Breaking of the Seal. Revised. The obsidian citadel settled into a hush, the deep silence that follows a great battle. Elisa walked the upper corridors barefoot, the oversized hem of Ferris's shirt whispering against her skin, still carrying the sharp scent of smoke and adrenaline. Although the rogue threat had receded hours earlier, the night remained unsettled. She carried a basin of steaming water and clean linen, passing guards who knelt without command, eyes lowered, none daring to stop her. Ferris's private chambers crowned the highest tower, sealed by massive doors carved with the wolf and moon sigil. She pushed them open, stepping into firelight and shadow. He sat on the edge of the enormous bed, stripped to the waist. The moon's mark blazed at his throat, catching the light, but lower, a deep claw wound marked his ribs, seeping slowly. He had hidden this weakness from his entire court, revealing it only to her. He looked up, and the raw exhaustion in his silver eyes stole her breath. "I gave orders you were not to see this," he stated, voice rough. Elisa set the basin down, soaked the linen, and crossed the room, kneeling between his knees without a word. She pressed the warm cloth to the wound, and he flinched, not from pain, but from the unexpected gentleness. "I do not take orders anymore," she murmured softly. His hand lifted, then settled over hers. Applying pressure, as though the pain were simpler to manage than her tenderness. She cleaned the gash in silence, tracing its edges. It was deep and ugly, but it would heal. Lycan Kings did not perish from claw marks. They died from the loneliness of centuries. When the blood was gone, she leaned in and pressed her lips to the wound, once, twice, tasting iron and the faint trace of the storm within him. Ferris's breath fractured, and he tilted her face up, capturing her chin. "Do not offer comfort you do not mean, little wolf." "I mean every touch," she answered. His ancient, searching gaze softened, and then he pulled her onto his lap so she straddled him, hands sliding beneath the shirt to grip bare skin. The movement tore the wound open again, blood tracing a fresh line down his ribs, yet he didn't care. His mouth found hers. Slow, deep, and devastating, like he was memorizing the taste of forgiveness. Between kisses, his voice was raw, torn from a place centuries deep. "The law of salvage was written for Lycans like me," he confessed. "Born too strong, broken by mates who feared what we were, It gave us the right to sever a bond that was killing us, to choose again, to live. His hands settled, possessive, on her hips. I claimed you because the law allowed it, but I wanted you the moment I saw you standing outside in the cold while they crowned your sister. You were burning, Elisa, and no one noticed except me. She felt the truth of his words settle deep within her bones, like heated wine. Reese's letter tonight, she began. Ferris's growl cut her off, low and lethal. He wants what he cannot have again, he said. He loved your silence. I want the female who will stand in my war room and correct my maps, the one who kisses blood from my skin after battle and does not flinch. His thumb traced her lower lip. Tell me what you crave, Elisa. Tell me what they denied you, and I will give you the right to claim it. The words shattered the last of her self-doubt. She kissed him again, deep and slow, until the only sounds were their racing hearts and the soft whisper of fabric falling away. Moonlight painted her skin in silver, and Ferris looked at her as if she were the first dawn he had seen in 1,000 years. His hands mapped every scar, every curve, every place Reese had never cared to touch, with worship and hunger in equal measure. He laid her back against the furs with reverence and followed her down with surrender. There was no rush, only discovery, the way his breath caught when she traced the moon's mark with her tongue, the prayer and curse that was her name tearing from his throat, the perfect fit of their bodies. Afterward, as the fire burned low, he pulled her to his chest, his hand resting over the coin that lay between her breasts. You are safe, he whispered into her hair. You are seen. You are mine by choice, not by law. Elisa turned in his arms, pressing her palm over the fresh scar on his ribs, and felt the steady thunder of his heart beneath her hand. And you are mine, she answered, her voice steady, fierce, and unbroken. She slept wrapped in storm and starlight, the weight of centuries finally lifted from both their shoulders. When the cold, pale dawn crept in, she woke alone, though the bed was still warm. On the pillow lay a small wooden carving of a silver-eyed wolf with a crown of stars, no larger than her thumb. Beside it, a note in his angular script repeated his vow. You are safe. You are seen. You are mine by choice, not by law. She closed her fist around the carving, smiling, slow, sharp, and utterly unafraid. The rogue threat still lingered beyond the walls, but here, in this room, something ancient had finally found its match. And the moon herself, ancient and no longer lonely, watched them, finally content. Chapter 8. The Shadow of Regret. Dawn bled across the highest balcony of the obsidian citadel, pale gold slicing through the storm clouds that never quite left the peaks. The entire court was assembled below in perfect silent ranks, black and silver and winter steel, waiting for the ritual that had not been performed in 400 years. The public acknowledgement of a chosen Luna. Elisa stood at the balcony's edge in a gown of midnight velvet and molten silver, the fabric clinging to every new curve and scar she now wore like armor. The wooden wolf carving hung beside the black iron coin at her throat. 2 talismans, 2 promises. Her hair was unbound, whipping in the wind like a battle standard. Ferris stood beside her, not behind, not in front, equal height on the dais they had ordered built overnight. His hand rested at the small of her back, steady, possessive, proud. When the great horn sounded, every wolf in the courtyard dropped to one knee. The sound that followed was not a cheer. It was a low, rolling growl of acceptance that vibrated through stone and bone. Ferris lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles once, slow, deliberate, then turned to the kingdom. Behold your Luna, he declared, voice carrying to the farthest ranks without effort. Chosen by the moon's mark, forged in fire, mine by right and hers by choice. The growl became a roar. Elisa felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, like a mantle she was finally strong enough to carry. Then the gates crashed open below. A column of riders thundered into the courtyard, emberstone colors, mud-spattered and desperate. At their head rode Rhys, golden hair wild, eyes bloodshot, flanked by the same elders who had once ordered Elisa's shame. The roar died instantly. Rhys dismounted and strode forward until the guards forced him to his knees 20 paces from the dais. His gaze found Elisa, and something cracked wide open in his face. Regret, terror, hunger. Ferris's hand tightened at her back, a silent question. She stepped forward alone. The courtyard held its breath. Rhys's voice came out broken. "I come to petition the king. The rejection was a mistake. The elders feared her bloodline. Uncontrollable, they said. They forced my hand. I was young, weak. I see that now. Give her back, your majesty. Let me make it right." The elders behind him nodded, greedy and certain. Behind them, Gina stood pale and silent, wrapped in a traveling cloak, eyes fixed on the stone. Elisa felt every stare like needles. She felt the old guilt rise. Family, duty, the child who had always come second. Ferris said nothing. He had promised her this moment. The floor was hers. She descended the dais steps slowly, the silver hem of her gown trailing like moonlight over obsidian. When she reached Rhys, she stopped just out of arm's reach. He looked up at her and flinched at what he saw. "You want me back," she said, voice clear enough for the entire courtyard to hear. "Now that I have value. Now that a king looked at the girl you threw away and called her treasure." Rhys's mouth opened, closed. "Elisa! You didn't protect me from my fire, Rhys," she continued, calm and merciless. "You locked me in the shadows because you feared the light I could cast. You wanted a Luna who would stay small so you could stay safe." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell Ferris on her skin, close enough that the wooden wolf carving brushed his cheek when she leaned in. "I am not yours to reclaim," she whispered. "I never was." Then she straightened and turned to the elders. "You feared what I might become," she told them, loud enough for every wolf to hear. "You were right to fear." She looked at Ferris, at her equal, her storm, her home, and something fierce and radiant passed between them. Ferris's voice rolled across the courtyard like winter thunder. "The bond is dissolved, permanently. Alpha Rhys of Emberstone is censured. His claim is ash. Any wolf who speaks against my Luna will join him in the cold." He descended the steps, took Elisa's hand, and pulled her gently back to his side. Rhys stayed on his knees, staring at the place where she had stood, shoulders shaking with the weight of what he had lost forever. Gina stepped forward then, eyes bright with unshed tears. She met Elisa's gaze and for the first time in their lives did not look away. "I was cruel," Gina said, voice trembling but steady. "I took what was never mine because it was easy. I'm sorry." Elisa felt the words land like stones in still water. She did not forgive, not yet, but she nodded once, acknowledgement and warning both. Ferris's arm slid around her waist, anchoring her as the guards dragged Rhys and the elders away. When the courtyard finally emptied and the wind howled lonely across the stones, he turned her to face him. "You chose yourself," he said quietly, thumb brushing the tear she had not realized had fallen. "That was not cruelty, little wolf. That was mercy and strength." She pressed her forehead to his chest and let the tremor run through her, the last echo of a life she had finally buried. Above them, the dawn broke fully, gilding the citadel in fierce, unforgiving light. And for the first time, Elisa did not feel small beneath it. She felt like the storm itself. Chapter 9. The Luna's Revelation and the King's Pledge. Moonlight poured through the stained glass roses of the citadel's winter garden, fracturing into shards of silver and blood red across the snow-dusted stone. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming frost jasmine and the copper ghost of the morning's judgment. Elisa stood at the center of the path, barefoot despite the cold, cloak open, letting the wind rake its fingers through her hair. She had come here to be alone. She had not managed it. Ferris found her anyway, silent as falling snow, until his heat pressed against her back and his arms slid around her waist from behind. He did not speak. He simply rested his chin atop her head and let her feel the steady drum of his heart between her shoulder blades. "I broke him," she whispered to the darkness. "I looked into Rhys's eyes, and I broke him." "You freed him," Ferris answered, voice low, rough with the day's echoes. "There is a difference." She turned in his arms, searching his face, the strong bones, the scar through one eyebrow, the silver eyes that had watched kingdoms rise and fall. "I feel the weight of it, the cost. My mother's voice in my head telling me family is everything. Gina's tears, the elder's fear, all of it pressing down like the mountain itself." Ferris cupped her face, thumbs stroking the hollows beneath her cheekbones. "Then let me carry half." He kissed her forehead, her closed eyelids, the corner of her mouth, slow, deliberate, reverent. "I have not told you the whole truth," he said against her skin. "Not because I wished to keep it from you, but because I was waiting for the female strong enough to hear it." Elisa pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. "Tell me now." He took her hand and pressed it flat over the moon's mark. Beneath her palm, the brand pulsed, alive, warm, almost desperate. "You feel that?" he asked. "It has been cold for 1,000 years. Every Luna offered, every alliance proposed. Nothing woke it. Until the night I saw you standing in the snow while they crowned your sister inside. The moment your bond broke, the mark burned. Not with duty, with recognition." His voice dropped to something raw and ancient. "You carry dormant Lycan blood, Elisa. Rare, feared, the kind that amplifies every sense until the world screams, the kind packs have killed to keep quiet. Your family did not neglect you because you were lesser. They neglected you because they were terrified of what you would become if you ever learned your worth." The words struck her like winter lightning. Every memory rearranged itself. The way sound had always been too sharp, scents too layered, emotions too loud. The headaches after full moons, the way her mother had whispered, "Control yourself," like a prayer and a curse. The elder's fear when she was a child and accidentally shattered a crystal goblet just by gripping it too hard in anger. All of it clicked into place. She laughed once, sharp, incredulous, free. "They tried to bury a queen," she said, voice trembling with fury and wonder. "And you dug me up." Ferris's smile was slow and feral. "I intend to set you on a throne beside mine and watch the world tremble." A horn shattered the night. 3 short blasts, urgent. Kale burst through the garden doors, armor half-buckled, face grim. The rogue leader struck the northern settlement, burned it to the ground. They left a message carved into the chapel door. "The false king and his ash whore will kneel or bleed." Ferris's expression turned to Winterstone. Elisa was already moving. They rode out within the hour. Ferris at the head of 50 riders, Elisa at his right hand, cloak snapping like a war banner. The settlement was ash and screaming silence when they arrived. Charred beams, frozen blood, the stench of terror thick enough to choke on. At the center of the ruined square stood a single figure in crimson armor, face hidden behind a wolf mask carved from bone. The rogue leader. She, spread arms wide in mocking welcome. "Ferris of the false mark," the voice called, distorted by the mask. "The moon chose wrong. Step down. Give us the female, or watch your kingdom burn one village at a time." Ferris dismounted, blade singing free. Elisa was faster. She walked forward alone, boots crunching through frozen ash, until she stood 10 paces from the masked figure. Power coiled under her skin, new, vast, hungry. "You want me?" she asked, voice carrying on the wind like a blade. "Then look at me." She let the amplification rise. Every heartbeat in the square suddenly thunder, every breath a roar, every lie a stench. The rogue leader staggered as though struck. Elisa smiled, slow and terrible. "I hear your fear," she said. "I hear the lie in your pulse. You are no leader. You are a coward wearing someone else's banner. She stepped closer. "Take off the mask!" The rogue leader snarled and lunged. Ferris moved to intercept, but Elisa lifted one hand. "Stop." The rogue's blade froze mid-swing, trembling in the air as though caught by invisible chains. Elisa tilted her head, listening to the blood singing in the rogue's veins. "Former General Tavrin," she announced to the watching warriors. "Banished 20 years ago for treason. You thought a mask and a few desperate rogues would hide your stink from me?" She flicked her fingers. The mask shattered. The face beneath was scarred, older, twisted with rage and recognition. Tavrin screamed and attacked again. This time Ferris met him. Steel met steel in a blur too fast for human eyes. But Elisa saw everything, every feint, every weakness, every heartbeat. She stepped forward, placed her palm against Tavrin's chest mid-swing, and pushed. Power poured out of her, pure, silver, unstoppable. Tavrin flew 20 feet and slammed into the charred chapel wall. The impact cracked stone. He slid down, gasping, blade fallen. Ferris sheathed his sword and turned to her, eyes blazing with pride and something deeper. Awe. The watching warriors dropped to their knees as one. Elisa stood in the ashes, heart thundering, every sense alive and singing, and felt the last piece of the girl she had been turned to cinder and blow away. Ferris crossed the square in 3 strides, cupped her face, and kissed her in front of the kneeling army. No hesitation, no restraint, just raw claim and reverence. When he pulled back, his voice rang across the ruins for all to hear. "You did not just stand with me, Luna," he said, loud enough for the wind to carry it to every corner of Vare. "You fought for me." Then quieter, for her alone. "And I will spend the rest of eternity fighting for you." Elisa looked at the kneeling wolves, at the burning settlement, at the male who had never once tried to make her small. She took his hand. Together, they turned their backs on the ashes and rode for the citadel, side by side, equals in storm and fire. Behind them, the rogue army scattered like smoke before the coming dawn, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the moon's mark burned steady and warm, no longer searching. It had found its match. Chapter 10. Ascending in fire and clarity, the great hall of the Obsidian Citadel had never looked so alive. Every banner of every pack in Vare hung from the rafters, black, silver, crimson, storm gray, swaying gently in the updraft from 1,000 torches that burned cold blue and gold. The floor itself had been polished until it reflected the vaulted ceiling like a dark mirror. At the far end, where the single obsidian throne had sat alone for a millennium, 2 new thrones now rose, equal height, carved from the same black glass, side by side, unyielding and unbreakable. Elisa walked the length of the hall alone. No crown yet. Only the black iron coin and the small wooden wolf at her throat, and the storm-gray gown that moved over her skin like living shadow. Her hair was unbound, falling in a river of night to her waist. Every step rang clear against the glass, and every wolf in the hall, alpha, elder, warrior, servant, turned to watch the female who had once been invisible stride forward as though the world had always belonged to her. She felt their stares like heat and reverence. She did not shrink. At the dais, Ferris waited. He wore no crown either, only the moon's mark blazing at his throat, brighter than it had ever burned. His eyes tracked her approach with the same hunger and pride that had lived in them since the night he first called her Ash Bride. When she reached the steps, he descended one, then another, until they stood eye to eye. He offered his hand. She took it. Together they turned to face the kingdom. The herald's voice rolled like thunder. "People of Vare, behold your sovereigns, Ferris, bearer of the moon's mark, king of the Iron Wolf crown, and Elisa, chosen Luna, fire-forged and unbreakable." Ferris spoke first, voice carrying without effort to the highest rafters. For 1,000 years this throne has stood alone. Today it stands witness to a new law. Strength is not decided by blood. Worth is not measured by birth. From this night forward, no wolf will be shamed for the power in their veins. No female will be silenced to keep a male comfortable. No bond will be broken out of fear. He turned to Elisa, took the silver circlet offered by Kyle, and held it up so every eye could see. "I will not crown you," he said, loud enough for the kingdom to hear. "You crown yourself!" Then he knelt. The Lycan King knelt before the entire dominion of Ver and offered the crown to the female he had claimed in fire and storm. Elisa felt the weight of centuries shift. She took the circlet, light as moonlight, heavy as destiny, and placed it on her own head. Then she reached down, threaded her fingers through Ferris's hair, and pulled him to his feet. The second circlet, black glass and starlight, she set on his brow herself. They turned together, hand in hand, and sat, side by side, equal rulers of a kingdom finally learning how to breathe. The roar that followed shook snow from the peaks. Later, when the oaths were sworn and the wine flowed and the musicians played songs older than memory, Gina found her. She stood at the edge of the dais steps, smaller than Elisa remembered, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I was never the golden child," Gina said quietly. "I was the cage they built to keep you small. I hated you for making it easy to hurt you, and I hated myself more." Elisa studied her sister, really looked, for the first time in years. "I don't forgive you yet," she said, "but I understand you. That is enough for tonight." Gina's tears fell, but she smiled, small, broken, hopeful. She bowed, low and deep, and walked away. Much later, when the hall finally emptied and the torches burned low, Ferris led Elisa up the hidden stair to the highest tower, the one that looked out over the entire dominion, where the wind never stopped singing. The balcony was wide and open to the stars. Snow drifted lazy and soft, catching in her hair like diamonds. Ferris pulled her back against his chest, arms banding around her waist, chin resting atop her head. "Tell me what you see," he murmured. Elisa looked out over the sleeping kingdom, villages glowing like scattered embers, rivers glinting silver under the moon, mountains standing eternal guard. "I see a world that tried to bury me," she said, voice steady and fierce. "And I see the fire I rose from." She turned in his arms, reached up to trace the circlet on his brow. "I was rejected for my shadow, Ferris, but you taught me how to turn it into my crown." His eyes softened, ancient, tender, utterly hers. "The Lycan King needs no queen who does not know her own worth," he said, voice rough with truth. "You are my clarity, Elisa, my moon, my only mercy." He kissed her then, slow, reverent, a vow sealed beneath the same moon that had watched them burn and break and become. When they drew apart, foreheads still touching, the wind quieted for the first time in memory. Far below, the wolves of Ver lifted their heads and began to sing, not a howl of grief or war, but a new song, one of partnership, one of fire and storm finally at peace. Two thrones stood side by side in the great hall. Two wolves stood equal on the highest balcony, silver circlets catching starlight, hands clasped tight enough to withstand another 1,000 years. And for the first time in forever, the wind over Ver finally slept. And the moon, ancient, cold, and no longer lonely, smiled down on the kingdom she had waited centuries to see whole. The end.